the moving of the water. You ought to slap your neighbor, tell him, I know he's right. Everybody is sitting up waiting for their ship to come in. They are sitting up waiting for their blessing to materialize. But I stop by to tell you this morning, you better stop waiting and you better go after it. I wish I had some help in here. The reason why it hadn't got to you yet, because you ain't hungry enough. You ain't thirsty enough. You ain't committed enough. But if you get to the place that says, listen, I'm going to stop waiting and I'm going to run to what already belongs to me. You ought to stop your neighbor, tell him, I know that's right. Here it is. And look at the pool. And look at the folk that were around the pool. Impotent folk. Blind folk. Halt folk. And they were all waiting for the troubling of the water. Every now and then, an angel will come down and stir the water. And the text says the first one that got in would be healed. Some had waited for days. Some had waited for months. Some had waited for years. But the text says they all had something in common. Everybody sitting around the pool had a need. And they were sitting up waiting on who would get blessed the next. And here it is, there is in the crowd a man. He had been waiting for 38 years and his problem, watch this, has become his way of life. You ought to look to your neighbor and tell your neighbor, don't let your problem be a problem. Oh yes, this man's problem had become his way of life. This man's problem has become the way he carries on in life. How he sees things is based on folk that are impotent. How he sees things are based on folk that are sick. How he sees things are based on folk that are hurt. How he sees things are things of people that have been withered. And you got to understand that your company will begin to shape your environment. I wish I had a praying church in here. Did you notice the man's company? If I was down and out, I wouldn't want to be around folk that's down and out because misery loves a company. If I'm down, I wouldn't want to be around nobody that's down. If I don't have some stuff together, I don't want to hang out with folk that ain't got no stuff together. This man did not have a choice. This man's environment has become his way of life. And that's the reason why, young folk, you got to be careful who you surround yourself with, because your environment will become your way of life. When you left home and went to college, you didn't smoke or drink, but you got around some folk and you stayed around the folk and they began to drink and smoke, and next thing you know, you find yourself, I wish I had some help in here, I wish I could preach it like I feel it, you find yourself doing things that you don't normally do, but your environment has made its way into your life. This man was surrounded by sick folk. He was surrounded by blind folk. He was surrounded by lame folk. He was surrounded by withered folk. You got to see the picture. How can you survive for 38 years surrounded by impotent folk? How can you survive for 456 months surrounded by blind folk? How can you survive for 13,870 days around folk that are halt? How can you survive 332,880 hours of dealing with folk that are withered? Can you imagine being among folk that's always complaining, being among folks that are always depressing, being among folk that are always negative, being in this environment for 332,800 20 hours, this environment will cause itself to take on the life of the individual. And you got to look at the folk around the pool for 13,870 days. This man find himself in some company that is uncommon. This man finds himself around some folk that love to complain. He finds himself in the company of folk that love to be negative. He finds himself in the company of folk that ain't got nothing going on. This man has some blind folk in the crowd. Yeah, they were so blind they couldn't see the need for anything. And it's bad to be the seeing blind when you can't see the need to come to church, when you can't see the need to give devotion to God, when you can't see the need to look toward the hills from which cometh your help, knowing all of your help comes from the Lord. He had some folk that could not see. Not only were folk that could not see, they were blind. There were some more folk that were hurt. They were lame. They could not walk. And they found themselves in the bed of the pool. And they looked good. You got to understand, these lame folk, they look good sitting down. But the time you ask them to do something, they come up with all kinds of excuses, saying, I can't do this, nor can I do that. They never do anything to assist in kingdom building, but always sitting up complaining about what somebody else is doing. Not only were there blind folk, not only were there lame folk, but there was some withered folk. They were so withered. The book lets us know that they were dried up. They would not move. They would not clap. They would not sing with the choir. They would not preach and pray with the deacon. They would not wave their hand to tell the Lord thank you. They're just withered, just dried up. I don't want to see the Lord being magnified. Can you imagine all of these people being around the pool? This man's environment has become his way of life. And I just want to pause and tell you that your environment is so important to you because you become a byproduct of your environment. For 38 years, all this man heard was complaining. So he began to complain. I wasn't in the crowd, but if you allow me to use my hermeneutical suspicion, I just believe somebody in the crowd was saying, my back is hurting. Somebody else is saying, my blood pressure is up. Somebody else is saying, I could barely move. And somebody else is saying, you know, it's not a good day for me today. For 38 years, all this man heard was negative comments. And as a result, this man became negative. I said for 38 years, all this man heard was depressing comments. And here it is, this man became depressed. And I'm just trying to share with somebody that your environment will become your way of life. But I kept reading the text. And the text says that when Jesus, somebody said, when Jesus. Somebody said, when Jesus. Somebody said, when Jesus. Somebody said, when Jesus. You mean to tell me for 38 years, this man's condition becomes his way of life? And the text says that Jesus saw the man and he saw him in the condition that he was in. The text said that the man had been in the